A young man comes home and tells his dad that he just got his driver's license and asks to use the family car. And his dad says, hold on there just a minute. That requires a certain level of responsibility. Let's see if you can make the grade at school, keep your room clean, take care of the lawn, and get that haircut. Let's wait a couple of months and come back and see me. Well, a few months come and go, and the son comes back with the report card in hand and says, Dad, I did great at school in my grades, and my room's as neat as a pin. I just mowed the lawn. And his father said, yeah, but how about that haircut? And his son says, Jesus had long hair. And his dad says, well, that's perfectly true, son. Jesus also walked everywhere he went. It's hard to live up to Jesus, but it is a worthy endeavor and toward which we as Christians continually strive. Jesus came that we might have an example of how we ought to live, an example for us to emulate in our lives. It's instructive to note that God reached us through Jesus, but not just through Jesus. In our text, we find that he used many and varied ways to speak to us. Our text is from a letter to the Hebrews. That's the title of it. It's not clear who wrote the letter. There's no name mentioned in this particular letter. It's been ascribed to St. Paul, but to some others as well. What is clear is to whom it is written. It is written to the Hebrews, to the Hebrew or Jewish converts to the budding Christian faith. And we know that because the author, whoever she is, speaks their language, appeals to their history, begins in the past. God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. The author is referring, of course, to the Hebrew prophets, which include the likes of Father Abraham and Moses, as well as the major and minor prophets who have books of the Old Testament named after them, from Amos to Zechariah. The word prophet is comprised of a prefix pro and a suffix fet. Pro meaning for. If you're pro something, you're for something. And fet, or the Greek phonos, from which we get the word phonograph, telephone, microphone, things through which we speak. A prophet is one who speaks for the Almighty. Now, not only did God speak through the many prophetic voices of the Old Testament, according to our text, he spoke in varied ways. He spoke to Moses through a burning bush. He spoke to Isaiah in a vision in the temple. He spoke to Elijah through a still, small voice. He spoke through natural events, through a pillar of cloud at night, a pillar of fire at night, a pillar of cloud during the day. He spoke in many and varied ways, and in many and varied places. The land of Canaan, of course, Egypt, Babylon, Ur of the Chaldees. He spoke in many ways, through many agents, in many different places in the Old Testament. But our author is saying that we have arrived at a new age entirely. And guess what? God is still speaking. Our text continues. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed as heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. Now, last week we talked about God's creative power as revealed in the creation account of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We saw how powerful God's word was in that creative process. He said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, in the same token, we look to the New Testament Gospel of John that begins with the same words. In the beginning was the Word. And we find out in John's Gospel that the Word is Jesus. Now, isn't that a strange way to refer to Jesus as the Word? But you know, our words describe who we are and sometimes alert people to who we are. I'm a public speaker, so my voice is heard a lot. Sometimes I'll be out and around. This is a good lesson on watching what you say. I'll be shopping, run into one of you and be talking a mile a minute. Somebody will stick their head around the corner and go, "I thought that was you." They hear the voice, and it identifies the speaker. And our words express our thoughts. Jesus expressed God. God created the heavens and the earth, including humanity. He's much bigger than humanity. But if he were to be embodied in human form, he would look like Jesus. And the interesting thing is that there's no physical description of Jesus anywhere in the Bible, because God would not want to distract us with superficial physical outward appearances. No, the substantive portrait of the Almighty in Jesus is unmistakable. Anybody who reads the Bible can hardly avoid the portrait of God that we are given in Jesus. He's loving, he's kind, especially to those who are in need. He almost had a radar that would look through the multitudes to find where the special need was, where he could bring healing and where he could bring wholeness. Now, he could also be testy with a certain type of person, an arrogant and rude person, an overprivileged person at the expense of the underprivileged, a self-righteous or excessively judgmental person. He could get testy with someone like that. But God revealed himself in Jesus to give us an example to follow, to emulate in our own lives. Oh my goodness. I went off on a tangent and skipped through a whole page. Well, that's all right. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, like Father, like Son. Okay, it's real chip off the old block. In Jesus, we see God. We see God in human form. And that's why God loved him so much. When he was baptized, when he was transfigured, God spoke the same words. "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased," because he patterned himself after the Father. Jesus was loving and kind, that is for sure. So God has a history of speaking to us through a Son, but also in many and other varied ways. And he is still speaking to us today. If you think about it, he speaks first and foremost to most of us through our parents. Before we ever come to Sunday school, before we learn to read, before we begin to hear the sacred story, before we can understand intricate theological concepts, we learn from our parents right from wrong, good from bad, truth from falsehood. Okay? Now, we've already honored our mothers on Mother's Day, so we don't want to leave good old Dad out, and we're honoring him today in keeping with the 10 Commandments as found in God's holy word. Why does God want us to honor our fathers? It is because God reaches us first and foremost through our parents, through our fathers. Now, our dads are a mixed bag, okay? We all know that. And we love to point out their failings and flaws because they point ours out. And it's a lot of fun in our family. And it is true, there's no such thing as a perfect person. They have their shortcomings. And in the Bible, the exemplars of faith to whom we look up to had their failings and faults. We heard a selection in our Old Testament lesson from Solomon, whose father was David. David was the standard by which all the kings of Israel were judged subsequently. But he did a pretty bad thing in his life, recorded in the Scriptures. But he was also faithful and devout to the Almighty and became an exemplar of faith. His son learned that from him. Solomon became a very wise and discerning person in his world. The two of them wrote much of the Old Testament. But Solomon, as wise as he was, could still make some foolish decisions that are recounted in God's holy word as well. But we saw how the best in them was passed from generation to generation in our Old Testament lesson. Listen, my sons, Solomon's writing to his boys. Listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. When I was a boy in my father's house, still tender and the only child of my mother, he taught me. He taught me. I'm teaching you. And what we teach our children is the best. If we are a mixed bag, our children need the part of the mix that is good and godly, and get it uniquely from a father figure in their lives. Children are amazingly oblivious to a lot of things, but to paraphrase Forrest Gump, they know what love is. They know what it isn't. They know that they need it. They know when they're not getting it. And when they don't get it, they yearn for it desperately. Some things you don't have to teach a kid. You don't have to teach them to hunger and thirst. They'll cry from the get-go when they're hungry. And you don't have to teach them to need love. They hunger and thirst for it if they aren't getting it from their primary sources, including their fathers. My son chums around with a friend, happens to be a gal, and they were just out on Lake Erie yesterday, and she has a sister who's a single mom, has a little boy at home. Sometimes they'll go visit them, and when that happens, Jim relates very well to both the very young and the very old. This is his nature. So when they go to visit, he lets the two sisters go off and talk, and he zones in on that little boy. And he finds out what kind of toys he has and plays with him, listens to him, talks to him. And that little boy started calling him Daddy. Well, you're better than I was. I heard that, and my first response was to laugh. And then I went, no. But immediately, I mean, that really is sad. No, I mean, it just is. This is a little boy who desperately needs a father figure in his life, knows what he needs, and is looking for that. Zach Brown Band is recorded at the top of our bulletins, a song that they've sung recently about a child's need for that guiding influence. He was a giant and I was just a kid. I was always trying to do everything he did. I can still remember every lesson he taught me, growing up, learning how to be like my old man, learning how to be a faithful husband and a devoted father and a good provider. And we're not just talking about money or things here, providing, most importantly, a safe, secure, stable, loving environment into which any child would prosper and grow. A father's enduring, unconditional love is like the Father's love for us. And that's why God, in the Scriptures, calls us to honor them. Because our fathers reveal something about God to us. And speaking of songs, I realize we're talking about fathers and sons here a lot in the Zach Brown Band, and Solomon happened to have two boys, and David had a son. But little girls, they need their father's unconditional love in a special way. And there was another song written by Amy Grant who spoke to that, called My Father's Eyes. The lyrics to that portion of the lyrics: I may not be every mother's dream for her little girl, and my face may not grace the mind of every mind in the world, but that's all right as long as I can have one wish, I pray. When people look inside my life, I want to hear them say, she's got her father's eyes, her father's eyes. eyes that find the good in things when good is not around, eyes that find the source of help when help just can't be found, eyes full of compassion, seeing every pain, knowing what you're going through and feeling it the same, just like my Father's eyes. And a little girl will learn about her Father's eyes in her Father's eyes. If you have had a good and loving Father in your life, I hope that you will find a way to return a token of that love today with a card or a visit or a call. If your father has preceded you in death, I can tell you from the voice of experience what your father's fondest wish was, what all the discipline was about, what all the sacrifices were about, what all the guidance was about, was that you might have a full and abundant life, that you might make the most of each and every day. And if you really want to honor your father in the most substantive way, honor that wish of his for you. If you did not have a father like that, maybe you had a surrogate father in your life. I've had some people who have looked to me for the Lord knows why as a mentor, and every once in a while we'll get in touch and speak fondly of our relationship. And I'll tell you, it makes your day. You could make somebody's day today if they were a surrogate father for you. And we're all called to be surrogates in one way or another. We're all part of God's many and varied ways that he reaches his children with his love. And we are not only on the giving end of that, we're on the receiving end of it, because we're all children of the Heavenly Father. Please rise.